Okay. I've never had music introduced me. That's really cool. Well, thank you very much for that not well-deserved introduction, but nevertheless very much appreciated. I'm going to hold this if I can. The one thing the rabbi forgot to mention is I am in fact single, so if you have Jewish granddaughters, just find me at the end. I don't know why you're laughing. That's the real reason I do this. I really say it's the anti-Semitism, but deep down it's because I'm lonely. Two quick announcements. Number one, I am not texting, but I'm using my phone as a timer because I get distracted very easily, as you'll shortly see. I'll actually tell you something funny, so distraction number one. I was in a synagogue in Miami a couple months ago, and like 40 minutes in, I look down at my phone, and I think to myself, wow, I'm doing really, really well on time. And it turns out I forgot to start the timer. So I was ready to keep going, but the rabbi was like at the top off the stage. But I can assure you I have started the timer, so don't worry. And the second disclaimer I want to say is Ben Shapiro told me a couple of weeks ago I talk too fast, which is a little weird coming from Ben. But I have been told I talk quickly, so if you find that to be the case, just raise your hand. I will do my best to slow down, but it is not intentional. I just apparently speak quickly. Okay, without further ado. The story at Harvard... Oh, I had one last disclaimer. I'm from New York. Nobody's perfect. And I was in San Francisco for the very first time about a month or two ago for the Club Z conference. And I went, yeah, we went to Club Z. And when I got the invite to come here, I was very concerned because it sounded like it was in San Francisco, but I've been reassured that we are not in San Francisco. So it's great to be here and not in San Francisco. I really don't like San Francisco. Without further ado, I was offered drugs. Okay, I'm not going to get into it. Without further ado, the story of the anti-Semitism at Harvard University really, in my opinion, begins 100 years ago. The president of Harvard at the time, in the 1920s and 30s, was a man by the name of Abbott Lowell. President Lowell, like most Ivy League university presidents at the time, was... Very good, was an anti-Semite. I asked this question like 2 days ago, and the audience goes, he was Jewish. Well, that's awkward. He was an anti-Semite. By the way, I think I'm very funny, so if you wouldn't mind laughing at my jokes, it's been a really tough year for me. So, okay, self-deprecation works too. He was an anti-Semite. This was a Nazi sympathizer. This is someone who, in his own words, felt that there were too many damn Jews at the university. So in Abbott Lowell's brilliance and wisdom, he decides the best way to crack down on the Jew problem, namely that there are too many Jews, was to institute a quota, a legalized metric of discrimination, a cap on how many Jews were allowed into the university. And just as a fun fact, you can impress all your dates on this, although I have tried, it has not worked. At its peak, Harvard was 25% Jewish. Today it is 4% Jewish. It's not because Jews got dumber over time, it's because there has been a deliberate and systemic campaign to crack down on the amount of Jews at Harvard University. As a percentage, there were more Jews at Harvard University under the proposed quota system than there are today. But to me, the biggest problem with the quota system is actually its shocking relevance in the 21st century. So there's a woman, you may have heard of her, by the name of Claudine Gay. Ooh, yes, that's the real boo. Yeah, it's funny. My doctors tell me I have high blood pressure. I say, yeah, 2 words, Claudine Gay. This woman has taken like 10 years off my life. And Claudine Gay, about 3-4 years ago, when she was dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, she decides that words can be dangerous, words can be derogatory, words can be violent, and without getting into the politics of it, although I'm happy to during the Q&A, Claudine Gay decides that Harvard, because they always have to be better and different than everybody else, they don't use the term RA, resident advisor, to describe a graduate student who lives in the undergraduate dorms. They use the term master of the house, which is not a great term. I was not around in 1636 when they voted on it, but not a great term. So again, Claudine Gay decides words are dangerous, words are violent, words are derogatory. In order to create a more equitable, inclusive, diverse environment for African American students, we are going to rename it, and today it is no longer called a master of the house, it's called a dean or a tutor of the house. As you can tell, I am not black, and if that's what makes black students at Harvard feel more included and welcome, then I'm really not opposed. I actually think that's probably a good thing. The problem is, and this will be a theme for tonight, if you remember our friend Abbott Lowell, the plurality of Jewish students at Harvard University right now, as we speak, live in a dorm called Lowell House. They live in the building named after the dude who didn't want them on campus to begin with. So if you want to play the game that all minority students need to feel safe and included and welcome, then fine, play the game. I'm really not opposed. The problem is Harvard has historically, consistently, and routinely deployed a double standard when it comes to their treatment of minority students and their treatment of Jews. And you don't even have to take my word for it. So there's an American NGO called FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions. And FIRE, this is 3 or 4 years ago, they decide to rank 240 American universities as to how well these universities protect the First Amendment, commit themselves to free speech, introduce controversial or uncomfortable academic discourse into the classroom. Out of 248 American universities ranked on their commitment to free speech, you know what Harvard was ranked? They were literally ranked 248th. They were ranked dead last. This is an institution that, again, rightly or wrongly, routinely disinvites controversial speakers who are deemed transphobic. This is an institution that demoted an African-American professor for coming out against Black Lives Matter. This is an institution that unaccepted, if that's a word, about 12 admitted students when it turns out they were posting sexist memes in a private WhatsApp group. They really do not have a strong track record of protecting free speech of the First Amendment, which makes it very odd that my very first month of being a student at Harvard University, way before October 7th, the Harvard Palestine Solidarity Committee, which I always say is the largest compilation of intellectually challenged morons I've met in my life, they decided to invite a man by the name of Mohammed El Kurd to come speak on campus. For those of you who don't know who Mohammed El Kurd is, good job, the guy's a moron. This is someone who has seriously and openly professed that Jews eat the organs of Palestinians. This is someone who has seriously and openly professed that the Israeli occupying forces, the IOF, have internalized the ways of Nazi Germany. And for those of you who have the misfortune of being on Twitter, number one, please follow me. My mom stopped following me so I can use the ego boost. Although Douglas Murray follows me, which is pretty cool. Anyway, not the point. This is someone who has lamented on Twitter, Mohammed El Kurd, not Douglas Murray, has lamented on Twitter how sad it is that Palestinians can no longer hijack planes anymore. So the Harvard Palestine Solidarity Committee, with their very high IQ, decide this is the guy we want to come speak on campus for the third time. So we go to the Harvard admin, we go to DEI, we go to the Harvard president, and we say, look, rightly or wrongly, you have a strong track record of disciplining speech you don't like. Why don't you simply apply that logic to someone who is so obviously anti-Semitic, someone who has appeared on the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League's top 10 anti-Semites, which honestly is incredibly impressive considering how much competition there is to get on that list. Why don't you simply treat him in the same way you've treated other speakers and their racism and homophobia and sexism? And Harvard did something remarkable. They looked at us and they did something they'd never done before. They shrugged their shoulders and said, well, he has the First Amendment right, what do you want us to do about it? I mean, it's a shocking double standard. It's blatantly anti-Semitic, and as we'll prove in court, I'm suing them, I'll talk about that in a second, it's discriminatory. And if you Google my name, which please don't, for a lot of reasons, don't do it. But if you do, one of the attacks I get most often is I'm the conservative, partisan, Republican political hack. Which, number one, I don't know many conservative Republicans who voted for Bernie Sanders twice. Hold your booze, I'm repenting. Although you guys live in California, so don't even, right? You guys are the problem, it's not me. Anyway, I deliberately went to Harvard University to go beyond my preconceived notions, to explore and engage in uncomfortable dialogue and intellectual discourse. I was the only Jew, I studied religion and politics. I was the only Jew in my program who wore a kippah, who kept Shabbat, who kept kosher. I was aware that, unfortunately or fortunately, I was representing a community and an ideal much larger than myself. And because I'm not this conservative, partisan, Republican political hack, the very first class I took at Harvard University was a class called Religion, Nationalism, and Settler Colonialism, the Case of Israel-Palestine. That was my reaction to it. In this class, we literally learned as fact that historically the Jew has been powerless. And with the advent of the State of Israel in the 20th and now 21st century, the only way the Jew knows how to exert and exhibit their newfound power is, in fact, by internalizing the ways of Nazi Germany, which is how you students can appreciate why the IOF is so Gestapo-esque in their tactics. In this class, we were literally taught as fact, just like Mohammed El Kurd said, that the only way the Jew knows how to defend themselves is by using the tools of their oppressors, just like Nazi Germany. I'm embarrassed to admit this, although as I said, I'm suing them, so I'm repenting. But for the final paper, which was worth like 40 to 50% of your grade, I wrote my paper on Yeshayahu Leibowitz, who's a fascinating figure in Jewish history, with an epilogue. And in the epilogue, at the end of my paper, I used it to denounce, I lied through my teeth, and I used it to denounce the religious Zionist values I had grown up with, and to this day, it's the only paper at Harvard University I ever got an A+ on. And it's not even a very good paper. I use like ChatGPT for half of it. Don't repeat that part. That class was taught by 3 professors. One of them was a former spokesman for the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is a story for another time. 2 of those professors teach another course. This course is called Narratives in Displacement, the case of, who's paying attention? Very good, Israel-Palestine. I'm not that boring. Or at least a little bit like fine. This class, by the way, as a side note, I've been banned from China for 3 years. I have an arrest record in Poland. It's probably why I'm still single. Probably one of many reasons. And if you were to have spent the last 3 years at Harvard University in a vacuum, you would literally not know that China or Poland were countries. Because the only country that is singularly discussed and obsessed over and read over is what? It's Israel-Palestine. In fact, the Religion and Public Life Department, where I take all these crazy classes, they have had more than 60 events on Israel-Palestine, which is more events on a country than every other country combined. They are obsessed. So this class is really interesting because in addition to being a regular course throughout the semester, they actually take you to what they call Palestine. I say it's what they call Palestine because the Palestine they take you to is like Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem and they pretend it's occupied. And the students are too dumb to realize they're not in Ramallah. So this class, see, I think I'm a catch. I think I'm very funny. My mom always says, you gotta stop with the jokes. I think they're great. Anyway, this class is really competitive because it's Israel-Palestine, it's very sexy, all the students want to take it, so you have to apply. During the interview, I applied because, again, I'm not this conservative, partisan Republican. My professors, and these are the 2 of the 3 professors from the previous course, they say, Shabbos, we've never had someone like you apply before. And I didn't know if they meant because, I wear a kippah, I didn't know if they meant because I don't believe in nuking Israel off the map. And I said, yes, it's so important that I go on this trip. Because in my insular Orthodox community, we're not allowed to discuss Palestine, which of course is not true, but that's what my professors wanted to hear. I kid you not, this is how the conversation went. They said, well, Shabbos, we're really concerned. I said, why are you concerned? They said, well, we're concerned because if we take you to Palestine, which again is like the shook, and we show you, this is way before October 7th, we show you the genocide, the ethnic cleansing, the illegal displacement of the Palestinian people, the apartheid, the settler colonialism, through the process of unlearning, which is a term so monumentously dumb, only a Harvard academic can come up with it. You will be so psychologically traumatized, you will not be able to reassociate yourself back with the Jewish day school, back with the Jewish synagogue, back with the Jewish community, because you'll have realized for 25 years, they have been feeding you a diet of lies, and we as your professors don't want to be held responsible for that psychological trauma, so they rejected me from the program. Okay, one more class, and then I'll get on. This class is called Religion and Peace, the case of... Yeah, okay, all right, I'm not bored. The case of Israel-Palestine. This professor gets up at Harvard Law School, and again, all these classes are before October 7th. And this is fully corroborated by a classmate of mine at Harvard Law School. Her name is Nitzan Blidman. She just wrote an article about this in Haaretz. And this professor gets up, and she said, I know, it's Haaretz, whatever. Again, nobody's perfect. And this professor says, in academia, in media, in politics, the Zionist narrative is the dominant narrative, which is laughably absurd, but okay. She says, therefore, in order to understand both sides of the story, we in this class, which again is called Religion and Peace, the case of Israel-Palestine, will not study, will not learn, will not discuss, will not read any texts if they were written by Israelis. So when people ask me my reaction to anti-Semitism on college campuses in the United States, my reaction is relatively succinct, which is, I'm shocked, but I'm certainly not surprised, because this is the inevitable outcome of decades and decades and decades of political indoctrination masquerading itself as academic discourse and intellectual worth when it is literally nothing other than a double standard and a deep-seated hatred of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. And in the interest of time, which again, I did start the timer, so we'll be out of here soon. I'm very jet-lagged. In the interest of time, I'll skip ahead to October 7th. October 7th was the joyous Jewish holiday of Simchas Torah, and we Jewish students were at Harvard Chabad, the main institution of Jewish life on campus. We were dancing, we were celebrating, we were drinking lots of water. High schoolers, for the adults it was vodka, and all but you didn't hear that part. And all of a sudden we heard these rumors. There was a stabbing, no, it was a shooting, no, it was a bombing. The reality is, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, as evident of the fact that we're in this room, the unfortunate reality is having a Jewish state in the 21st century means that there is terrorism. It's not good, we don't like it, but it happens. I lived in the old city of Jerusalem for 3 years. I studied at Yeshiva Eshet Torah. We had a rabbi who was stabbed to death outside of Jaffa Gate. There was a stabbing with a 14-year-old boy about 3 doors down from where I lived. We don't like terrorism, it's not good, but it happens. So when we heard that there was an act of terror in Israel, we were saddened by it, but number one, we didn't know the full extent of what was happening, and number two, because I'm an Orthodox Jew, I don't use my phone or any electronics on the Sabbath or the holidays, so I couldn't do much about it. The problem is, as the night went on, the rumors persisted and the rumors strengthened, and it became readily apparent that what we young American Jews were experiencing was something we had never experienced before in our lives, and that's what? That's Israel as an existential issue. Israel, where its legitimacy, its survival, yes, its existence is actually a question mark. We had never experienced that before. And, the next couple of minutes is a little graphic, so I try to break it up now with a story. I go to Miami a lot, so I was in Miami about a month ago, and because it's Miami, the average age of the audience is deceased. And as I'm speaking, that joke does not land as well in Miami. Although they're all, 95 and on hearing aids, so they can't hear me anyway. What did he say? And as I'm getting to this part in the story, I say, look, I was 4 years old during the Second Intifada. I was not alive during the First Intifada, any of the Lebanon Wars, 73, Suez Canal, 67, Yom Kippur. And I said, unlike many of you in the audience, I don't remember the 1948 War of Independence. And they got so offended, like, how dare you, we're not that old, but they literally all remembered the War of Independence. I don't know what they were angry about. Anyway, the reason I mention that is because we young Jews relate to Israel in a very different way. Israel is a place where we go to for Passover vacation. It's where you study. Some of your siblings or grandparents live there. But it's a place where you don't question its legitimacy or its existence in the same way you don't question the existence of Spain and Brazil and Ireland. Well, maybe we should question the existence of Ireland, but that's a different point. We just don't know Israel like that. And as I said, and this is where I get some pushback, this is where people get mad at me, the story of October 7th is really not October 7th. Hamas is a dictatorial, tyrannical regime that should be obliterated from the face of the earth. But they're a terrorist organization, and they have made it very clear what their goals are. You can read their charter, it's in English online, and they have stated quite explicitly that their sole goal is the eradication of the Jewish state from the river to the sea. Hassan Nasrallah, the since deposed head of Hezbollah, he couldn't make it tonight. He has stated openly, for years, that it would be great for all the Jews to pack up and move to Israel. Why? Because in his own words, it would be so much more convenient to kill them in one place than having to hunt them down country to country. So when terrorists commit acts of terrorism, we don't like it. There should be a forceful response, but it's not a surprise. What we could never have appreciated or understood was the most educated, the most progressive, the most elite, those who introduce themselves with their preferred gender pronouns, those who take knees for Black Lives Matter. On the night of October 7th, not months after the fact, on the night of October 7th, as they're watching in real time on live TV, Jewish women bleeding from their private areas. They're watching Jewish babies like Fear and Ariel crying as they're being hoarded onto a motorcycle and deported into Gaza. They're watching these videos of burnt, mangled, charred bodies. And the immediate reaction of 34 student groups at Harvard University, from the Feminist Society to the Arab Muslim Coalition, the immediate reaction of 34 student groups was to jump out of bed, some were still in their pajamas, to draft what they called an emergency statement to blame Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. That's not hyperbole, it's not exaggeration, it's not conjecture. The statement literally begins, we hold the Israeli apartheid regime entirely responsible for all ongoing violence in the Middle East. You know how many times these students condemned or mentioned Hamas in that statement? Zero. I was on a panel with MLK's niece about a month or two ago. I did not know he had a niece, but he does. She's great, Elvita. And Elvita reminds me of a great line from her uncle, which is, we won't remember the words of our enemies, but...
The silence of our friends.
Very good, but the silence of our friends. We won't remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. I am telling you, at Harvard, at Columbia, at Penn, at NYU, at UCLA, we would have been lucky to have had the silence of our friends. But we had, on the night of October 7th, people celebrated and glorifying what was occurring, namely the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. In fact, there's a great documentary on, it's free on YouTube, from PBS Frontline. It's called Crisis on Campus. You should all watch it tonight. It's very, very good. Crisis on Campus. And they interview me, and I'm not saying that's why the documentary is so good, it probably helped. And I give them, my 45-minute spiel. And then they interview 3 of the leading anti-Israel activists at Harvard University. And if you thought the Palestine Solidarity Committee were intellectually challenged, these 3 girls, they're at Harvard Law School. And the director of the documentary asks them a very simple question. And this is like April. This is 6 months after their statement. And they say, look, guys, given the blowback, given the controversy, given the hurt elicited by your statement, do you regret not condemning or even mentioning Hamas? And these 3 girls at Harvard Law School, again, you watch it for yourself, Crisis on Campus. They're in their keffiyehs, they're in their like glory to the martyr sweaters, and they look at each other and they do this. No, we don't regret it. We didn't think it was relevant. We didn't think it was relevant. I hope you can appreciate what I tell President Trump, what I tell Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate, what I tell the national media, what I will tell any organization that will have me. This is not just like a Jewy issue or an Israel issue. This is an issue that strikes at the very core of our Western civilization, at the heart of our liberal values and of our American democracy. When you can have the alleged best and brightest of a given populace, a given society, a given campus, see the murder of 45 American citizens in real time, see the abduction of a dozen Americans, including one who is still alive and in a terror tunnel in Gaza, and the immediate reaction is to side with the terrorists who did that thing, that is a profound problem for our country. And it is no secret that they say death to Israel, but we all know in this room that the next part of the statement is death to America. And yeah, they vandalized all of my Israeli flags. They literally vandalized all of my American flags. And yeah, they've taken down the hostage posters of the Israelis. They did the exact same thing with the Americans. So this is not an issue that is simply relegated to the Middle East. This is an issue that will affect each and every American. Why do we care about Harvard and Yale and Columbia and Penn? It's because, unfortunately, those institutions purport to train the next generation of American leaders, and by and large, they're kind of right. It's not an exaggeration at all to state, statistically speaking, I probably sat in a room with a future congressman, a future senator, even a future president of the United States. And if these are America's future political leaders, if these are America's future judges and jurors, if these are the authors of the books your kids and grandkids will read, I am telling you, America is at a dangerous crossroads. It's at an inflection point. And it is no secret that, as I said, we frame it as a war on Israel, but it is a war on the West. In the interest of time, I'll just say this. 2 days after October 7th, the Religion and Public Life Department, where I take all those classes, they released their own statement, and their statement begins by saying, quote, "The great Palestinian poet once said," which is a very odd way of starting the statement. And they go on to say, if you begin the story on October 7th and not the story of the Nakba, if you begin the story on October 7th and not the story of the illegal displacement of Palestinian people, not the story of the ethnic genocide, not the story of settler colonialism, you'll only get one side of the story. You know how many times these professors in their statement condemned Hamas? 0. So where do these brain-dead students get their brain-dead ideas from? It's from the brain-dead professors. I'm sure during the Q&A, they'll ask me about Qatar and foreign funding, and it's an important question, and we should discuss it. But ultimately, it's not rocket science. It is a student being taught in class as truth that the greatest thing you can do is be a social justice activist and warrior and fight against Western imperialism manifested no greater than the state of Israel. A day after that, there's a rally at Harvard University of more than 1,000 students and professors. And again, this is before Israel has any ground operation in Gaza. And these 1,000 students and professors are in their keffiyehs, they're chanting glory to the martyrs and resistance is justified, and one particular idiot by the name of Kojo gets up. And Kojo actually just finished a fully sponsored trip to communist Cuba, where in his own words, he will, quote, "take lessons of the revolution and impart them on college campuses," which is a problem for another time. And Kojo gets up and he says, "Hamas is not a terrorist organization. We will look upon them in 10, 20 years as freedom fighters. Who are we to condemn the resistance?" You know what the reaction is of America's best and brightest? Thunderous applause. Not one student or professor thinks to condemn, to challenge, or to walk out of that statement. It is no coincidence, therefore, that a week after that, there was a physical assault against a Jewish student at Harvard Business School. It was caught on camera. You could go on my Twitter and watch the video yourself. It's no coincidence, therefore, that a week after that, a Jewish undergrad at Harvard was spat on for wearing a kippah. It's no coincidence, therefore, that a month after that, an Israeli student at Harvard was told by her professor to leave the classroom because her nationality made other students uncomfortable. It is no coincidence, therefore, that a week after that, a Harvard employee vandalized all of my hostage posters, writing on Kfir Bilal's quote, "His head is still on, where is the evidence?" Writing on Noah Argamani that Jews are best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, who then challenged me to debate him in a secluded underpass as to whether Jews orchestrated 9/11, and then posted a video of him waving a machete with a picture of my face saying he wants to fight. He's coming after more than blood, and he has a plan to bring down the Zionist mafia. I had private armed security outside my house for a week. I had a guy with a gun follow me to Harvard Chabad to make sure I was okay. You know what the icing on the cake is that story of the dozens of phone calls and emails I sent to Harvard inquiring about this individual's employment status. To this day, they have not once responded to me. It is inconceivable that any other minority group would be treated with the disdain, the disregard, and the contempt that Harvard has historically, routinely, and consistently treated its Jewish student population. And I'd like to think that I could be relatively forgetful, relatively forgiving, but there's one thing I will not be able to forgive, or there's one thing I will not be able to forget, and that was the encampments. You remember the encampments? It was like all these, idiots lived in tents and refused to shower for 4 weeks. It smelled awful. It was like this dangerous combination of BO and communism. It was terrible. And forget about the fact that they called for an intifada at all hours of the day. Forget about the fact that they violated all time, place, and manner restrictions. Forget about the fact that Jewish students at Harvard were renting Airbnbs and living off of campus because they didn't want to be accosted on their way to class. Every single time I went to class, every single time I went on my own campus, every single time I cut through Harvard Yard, every single time, without exaggeration, classmates of mine, encampment leaders, when they would see me approaching, they would put on these bright yellow safety vests. They would call themselves safety marshals. They would tell us where we can and can't go on campus. And when they would see me coming, they would take out their phones and they would start recording me and they would start following me. And I would ask them why. I would ask them to stop, and they never once responded. And we told the president of the university and the president of the United States, but again, problem for another time, we told him that we Jewish students were being followed on our way to class. We were being recorded. We were being intimidated for simply being Jewish on campus. And in fact, the last week of the encampments, the National Lawyers Guild, which is a terrible organization, they came to Harvard and they gave the safety marshals notepads so they could write down which building these Zionist agitators were studying in so they could know where we were. We told the president of the university about this. It was well documented. Not only did the president of the university never respond to me, he told the encampment leaders, if you agree to pack up your tents, we will allow you to meet with the Harvard Management Corporation, which oversees Harvard's $50 billion endowment to discuss divestment from Israel. If you agree to pack up your tents, we will allow you to meet with senior Harvard faculty to discuss the establishment of a Palestinian Study Center, and of the hundreds of students and professors who took part in the encampments, you know how many were suspended or expelled? 0. You know how many times I've been able to meet with the Management Corporation or senior Harvard faculty or the president of the university? Also 0. But if you call for an intifada loud enough, if you follow Jews on their way to class long enough, if you vandalize enough property, they literally used bolt cutters to pry open the gates of Harvard Yard in order to allow outside agitators onto campus. If you do all of those things, you will be given a seat at the table. So that is something I will not be able to forgive and I will not be able to forget, which is why we filed a lawsuit in January against Harvard University, essentially arguing, wait, hold the applause, it'll get better. Just give me like 2 minutes. No, there's going to be a good applause line, like 2 minutes. We filed a lawsuit against Harvard University in January, alleging gross civil rights violations, among other things. Harvard's response, which I think is way more telling, when we filed the lawsuit, was not to recognize the reality of anti-Semitism, was not to apologize for the experience of its Jewish student population, it was not to come to the negotiating table. If any of you watch Suits, yes? Yeah, okay, that was a trick question. It's an inappropriate show. You shouldn't watch it. For the adults, it's a very good show. Harvard's response was they filed what's called a motion to dismiss with prejudice. So if you watch Suits, you know what that is. If you don't watch Suits, they argued in front of a judge that not only should the judge toss out our lawsuit, but they should set a legal precedent so that Jewish students in the future cannot hold them accountable for anti-Semitism. When we filed an amended complaint, an update to our lawsuit in May, I think it was, Harvard's response was literally the exact same thing. They filed a second motion to dismiss with prejudice, once again asking the judge, no apology, no recognition, no negotiating table, toss out Kestenbaum's lawsuit and set a standard so he can't do this again. And it bothers me to no end that we had to do this. And it bothers me to no end that we have to speak out against something that should not have occurred to begin with. So I don't know if the right word is proud or happy or frustrated, I don't know. But for whatever adjective it happens to be, in July, our judge, Judge Richard Stearns of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts, issued a 25-page scathing ruling, writing in part, quote, the facts as pledged show Harvard failed its Jewish students. He tossed out Harvard's double motions to dismiss. And as of today, we are the first case in American history pertaining to the civil rights violations of Jewish students on a college campus that's actually going to trial. It's never happened before in America. That was the applause line. Well done. Look, I'm running out of time, and I don't want to end by talking about our ideological adversaries, because I don't spend time thinking about them. I don't care about my idiot classmates who draw swat. It just doesn't faze me. What I want to say is this. It's no secret I spoke at the Republican convention. I asked the Democrats if they wanted me to speak. I'm still waiting for them to call me back, but we'll see. And that was a good joke, because the convention was like 6 months ago. Okay. Okay, whatever. I was going to make another self-deprecating joke. I decided to move on. The morning of my speech, a limo picked me up from my hotel, which is a very cool thing. Tell your Jewish granddaughters I said that. It'll impress them. Although it has not yet impressed my dates, but again, all you need is one. They take me, I really gotta stop with this. They take me to the convention arena, and we do what's called a walkthrough. A walkthrough is as boring as it sounds. Like the stage manager for the Republican convention was a guy named Eric. And Eric says, Mr. Kestenbaum, this is the podium you're going to use. That's the teleprompter to look at. This is what your hair and makeup's going to look like, which is a little odd coming from the Republicans, because the transgender stuff, okay, whatever. And he says, do you have any questions? As you can tell by how I'm dressed, I really don't care how I look. I'll tell you this off the record. I didn't care what was on the teleprompter, because the speech I gave and what was on the teleprompter were actually two very different things. I ad-libbed a lot of my speech. And I didn't care about the technicalities. I didn't care about the details. I didn't care about the logistics. We do this walkthrough for 2 hours. And he kept saying, how many questions, how many questions? I did not have a single question. At the end of the 2-hour walkthrough, I say, Eric, I think we're good. I'll see you later tonight. And I turn around to leave, and I open the door of the limo. And as I'm opening the door, something in my psyche kind of just stops. And I turn back around and I say, Eric, I actually do have one question. Can you promise me when I give this speech later tonight, in front of 30,000 people in the arena, in front of President Trump, in front of millions of Americans watching on TV, can you promise me when I give this speech, the camera that's televising the speech will be able to clearly see that I'm wearing a kippah? That's the only question I asked. Because I have two friends at home, I have more than two friends, although not much. I have two friends. I gotta stop. I have two friends at Harvard University who, in response to October 7th, have taken off their kippahs. I have a list in my phone I can show you of hundreds of Jewish students who told me from across North America that in response to October 7th, they've taken off their kippahs, they've tucked in their Star of David necklace, they've ceased their involvement with Jewish life on campus. And I thought to myself, irrespective of the substance of my speech, regardless of the words coming out of my mouth, the only thing I cared about was that those two friends and the hundreds I made along this journey would be able to clearly see that in the 21st century, young American Jews can and should and must be wearing their Jewish pride as loudly and publicly and confidently as ever before. It was the only thing I cared about. And I even remember... Thank you. And I even remember that night, right before my speech, I was in the speaker's lounge. I was eating chips with J.D. Vance. A young woman, an usher, comes to get me. And, okay, it's funny. I probably shouldn't say this, but it's funny. We're a fun crowd. When I first said this story, I didn't say an usher came to get me. I said an escort came to get me. and I actually said it in a synagogue. And the rabbi looked at me like horrified. I'm like, is everything okay? And he's like, what do you mean an escort came to get you? I'm like, what do you... Oh, no. That was for the other gal, that wasn't for me. So now I'm very careful to say it was an usher. Usher came to get me, and she escorted me. I don't know what else to say. She escorted me down a very long corridor, and we're flanked by Secret Service on either side. And we get to a very small room backstage. The small room backstage is 4 people. It's me, it's Lee Zeldin, who's now the EPA administrator, for whatever reason, and it's Omer Nutra's parents. Omer Nutra, of course, I used to say, is the American Jewish hostage still being held by Hamas? But unfortunately, we heard the horrific news about 2-3 months ago that he was actually killed on October 7th. He was killed. He died as he lived, which is as a hero. There's actually audio recording of his final moments. It's pretty difficult. But he died refusing to abandon his tank, refused to abandon his fellow soldiers. At the time, of course, this is in July or August, we thought he was very much alive. So I go to his parents, Ronen and Orna. I'll actually be with them next week. And I go up to him, and I say, there's nothing I can say. And there's certainly nothing I can do. I just want to add that the courage, the bravery, and the inspiration that you have given me on an individual level is something I will never be able to repay for the rest of my life. And with that, I walked out of the backstage room, and I did my speech. And if you watch my speech, you'll be able to see it from when I enter the stage. What you won't be able to see is 10 seconds earlier, me with tissues trying to wipe my tears. And remember, the Republicans had me in makeup, so the mascara was all like, that was for you guys. And then you wouldn't get it, since it's sour thing. And I've been so blessed and privileged and fortunate for the last 15 months to have met some pretty important people. I helped accompany President Trump to the grave of the Lubavitch Rebbe. I was starting with the Trump campaign. I've been so blessed and privileged and fortunate to have given some pretty big speeches, like the one at the convention. I've been so blessed and privileged and fortunate to have gone to some pretty cool places, obviously excluding San Francisco. And I really hate that place. And I can tell you, without a shadow of doubt, without any, okay, which? Yes. Thanks. I was telling the teams earlier, I get death threats on a weekly basis. So usually when there's a guy coming on stage, it's never a good sign. But this was a good sign, so thank you. A little nervous. I've been so blessed and privileged to do all those things, but I can tell you, none of them hold a candle to the 2-minute conversation I had with Omer Nutra's parents. And I speak on college campuses a lot, when, not so much anymore since I endorsed Trump, but I speak on college campuses. And I spoke at Binghamton University over the holiday of Sukkot in October. Binghamton's in upstate New York. And I go to the assembled Jewish students, about 200 people, and I tell them it's great to see some new faces, it's great to see some familiar faces. I can't help but notice there's one face that isn't here, and that's who? Anyone know? That's Omer Nutra. Omer Nutra was meant to be a student at Binghamton University. His semester was meant to have started 4 months ago. He deferred for the year to volunteer in Israel. And I tell these students, this is not a hostage crisis happening elsewhere. This is not a geopolitical conflict in the Middle East. This was not a great replacement. This is a story about you. This is a story about your classmate. This is a story about your friend, about your neighbor. This is a story about you. And I remember one of the first things I did after October 7th was I booked a one-way ticket to Israel. And full disclosure, I say it's one way, but that's really because Delta canceled the return ticket. That sounds a lot more heroic to say one way. So no one's other Jewish granddaughters, that part. And I spent 3 weeks digging graves for soldiers who were killed in Gaza. I spent 3 weeks delivering supplies to army bases. I spent 3 weeks playing guitar and singing for injured civilians in the hospital. And they said, please, we've suffered enough. I don't have a very good voice. And I did that because, yes, I wanted to get off of Harvard's campus, but it is also because I'm not the most religious dude in the world, but I can promise you, I have never felt more connected to the land of Israel, more attached to the people of Israel, and more proud and confident of my Jewish values, certainly in sharp contrast with our ideological adversaries. And I even remember checking in at Boston's Logan Airport with 15 duffel bags of bulletproof, I don't even know what, I'm shocked they let me on the flight. And as I'm checking in, this is October 15th, there are about 20 people to the right of me, and these 20 people have American flags, and they have Israeli flags, and they're blasting Hebrew music, and they're throwing candy everywhere, and this young girl comes up to me. I had never seen her before, I haven't seen her since. I don't know her name, I don't know where she's from. She could not have been older than 13. And this young girl comes up to me, and she says, here, I want you to have this, and she hands me an envelope. And I realize what's inside the envelope. It's dozens and dozens and dozens of $100 bills. And I go to this 13-year-old girl, and I say, there is no way I can take this. And I kid you not, this 13-year-old girl, she wraps her arms around me, and with tears coming down her eyes, she starts crying, please, please, take it from me and promise me you will give it to the first person you see in Israel. That's the story of the Jewish people. That's the story of Jewish people. And I was just part of a delegation to Israel with the foreign ministry. And the foreign minister, Gideon Savar, he took us to the Kerem Shalom border crossing, which is on the border of Israel, Gaza, and Egypt, because he wanted us to see the more than 800 humanitarian aid trucks that go into Gaza daily. This is feminine hygiene products, this is baby formula, this is food. It's going into Gaza on a daily basis. And this story is not a political stance. I'm not saying whether we should or shouldn't be doing this. But as we're watching these 800 humanitarian aid trucks, I'm standing next to a young IDF soldier. She's younger than me. And I asked her, I said, your job is to clear all the roads to make sure these trucks can go into Gaza. How do you feel about doing that? And she says, well, to be honest, I'm a little conflicted. I said, why are you conflicted? She says, well, I'm a little conflicted because my cousin is a hostage. I said, what? She says, yeah, my cousin's name is Don Alexander, who is the American hostage still being held by Hamas in captivity. And regardless of whether you think this is a good policy or not, regardless of what you think of the politics, that is the story of the Jewish people and Jewish peoplehood. That even when our own family is suffering, we will ensure that no innocent will suffer as a result. I'll say one last story because it's fresh off my mind. My brother, he just had his second child a few months ago. The child's first 2 days was spent in a bomb shelter in the Middle East because he was born the day Iran launched the 200 ballistic missiles into Israel. The child's circumcision, the Brit Milah, was on October 7th of 2024. The next day, the child's father, my brother, he puts on a uniform and he reports for reserve duty in Lebanon. And I remember texting my brother and asking him what was going through his mind, how he was feeling. And you know how he responds? So matter-of-factly, so succinct. He says, what an immense privilege. For the first time in 3,000 years, I have a uniform to put on. What an immense privilege. For the first time in 3,000 years, I have a country to defend. What an immense privilege. For the first time in 3,000 years, I have a land, I have a people, and I have values that are worth safeguarding. That's the story of the Jewish people. That's the story of Jewish peoplehood. And as much as I told you I have this list of hundreds of students who told me they don't wear the kippah and they've tucked in the Star of David and they've ceased their involvement, for every one of them, I can show you 10 more who post-October 7th have woken up and have said we are not going back to sleep. At Harvard Chabad, we have so many people that we have to clear out the top floor because we can't fit everyone. The amount of people who have said, I may not be religiously observant, but I'm going to light Friday night candles. I'm going to adopt a soldier and recite a chapter of Psalms in his honor. I'm going to wear an even bigger kippah. I'm going to increase my involvement with Jewish life on campus. I'm going to wear a Star of David necklace. Those are the peoples and those are the stories that we need to be amplifying, because that at its core is what the Jewish people are all about. And I'll close by saying this. I was speaking also in Miami a couple of months ago, and as I'm speaking, a woman raises her hand and she says, I want to add something. And as you just saw, I get death threats a lot, I get publicly criticized. It's never a good sign in the middle of a speech when someone says, I want to add something. And so this woman gets up, and I'm a little nervous. I kid you not, this is what she says. I guess you'll never know. She says, timing. She says, my name is Regina. I'm 103 years old. I am a survivor of Majdanek. I'm a survivor of Bergen-Belsen. I'm a survivor, and I fought in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. She told me this 2 months ago. She says, I want you all to know, we will get through this because we've gotten through it before. And then she sits back down. And I am here to tell you, on behalf of the thousands of Jewish students on college campuses, who in response to being told to go back to Poland, in response to having swastikas drawn outside their dorm windows, in response to having their mezuzahs smashed, in response to having their libraries and their classrooms shut off for them, have said, this is my people, this is my story, this is my heritage, count me in and put me in, coach. That's the story of the Jewish people. And the IDF does not want me, trust me. I cannot fight in the battlegrounds of Gaza or Lebanon or Yemen or Iran, but what I can do is I can fight in the battleground of ideas. I can fight in the court of law, I can fight in the court of public opinion, I can fight in media, I can fight in social media, I can fight in the halls of commerce, I can fight in the halls of power, I can fight in the classrooms, I can fight in the streets. And that is a fight that if you care about the vitality and the strength of the Jewish people, if you care about the preservation of the golden age of American Jewry, if you care about the continuity of the land of Israel, then I urge you, whatever your talents in whatever capacity, to stand up and join us in that fight. And if you do that, I promise you, without a shadow of doubt, if you stand up and join us in that fight, you join those brave Jewish students on college campuses who've redoubled their efforts in Jewish growth and in their Judaism, you will be a living, breathing testament to the power and to the promise that Am Yisrael Chai, that not only do the Jewish people live, but the Jewish people will always live now and forever. Thank you very much.
So, let's take it back to the beginning.
You know, usually it's the music cutting off the speaker, not the other way around, but I like it.
So, growing up, were you always someone who spoke out about what you believed in, or did this activism grow in later for you? And how involved were you in Jewish life back then?
Wow, I've never been at that. That's very existential. I'm very proud to have been raised in I'm very proud to have been raised in an Orthodox household, an Orthodox community. I'm actually one of 7, which is fairly typical. My dad actually was a Lubavitcher. He raised us to be modern Orthodox, unfortunately, but we always had a strong sense of appreciation and affinity with the Chabad movement. So when people say, why did you speak out? It's not that I spoke out. It's simply my Jewish identity is my identity. It's who I am. And in the same way, if someone were to take a core part of who you are, you would say something. I don't really think what I'm doing is particularly admirable or noteworthy or mentionable. It's simply what all of you would do if you were in the exact same situation. So I don't deserve the accolades because it's really simply being a product of a very strong community where we are value-oriented, where we go to our synagogues, where we pray and partake in Jewish rituals. And I was active in a political sense. I did a lot of work with Uyghur activists. They're actually experiencing a genocide. That's one of the reasons I'm banned from China. I was active also in Poland combating Holocaust desecration. So politically I was active, but in terms of my Jewish identity, I wasn't, simply because being a Jewish activist to me just meant being involved in a synagogue and partaking in as many mitzvot and learning opportunities as I could. And I always tell people, if you want to be the best advocate or the best activist, then the best thing you should be doing right now is getting a Jewish education, bar none. I always say, and this is quite tangential, but internally there's really only one way we combat anti-Semitism as a Jewish community, and that is by making sure there's not a single American Jew today who does not know where their nearest Chabad house is. There's not a single American Jew today who has not been to Israel at least once. And if you really want to combat anti-Semitism, you will make sure that there is not a single Jew today who does not have some affinity or knowledge of where their shul, where their Jewish day school, where their Jewish summer program is. Invest in Jewish education. That is the only way we are getting through this. So support your local Chabad. And no, you did not pay me to say it. I'm saying it because I know it to be true. There's no other way. We only get through this through Jewish education and through imparting the passion of Judaism to your kids and grandkids.
Completely agree. So now fast forward a bit. When you decided to take on Harvard, that was a huge move. Was it scary to think about fighting such a massive institution? What were your fears, if any, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I'm very lucky because Harvard is run by incompetent individuals, so it made our fight pretty easy. I'll say this, in the same way that my first answer was I didn't have to think about being an activist because being Jewish is simply who I was. When we filed a lawsuit, when we were speaking up in Congress, when we were fighting on media or social media, it's not that we were taking on Harvard and we should be intimidated. It's simply Harvard is in the wrong and we have an obligation to call them out. And if you remember where you were on December 5th, I remember where I was because it was the congressional testimony of the three leading morally bankrupt individuals in the United States, Claudine Gay of Harvard, Liz McGill of Penn, Sally Kornblue of MIT. And we all remember the infamous context-dependent question, but the entire testimony is actually the most watched testimony in American history. It has 1.5 billion views on YouTube and counting. And the entire testimony is a disaster from start to finish. At one point, Claudine Gay was asked if she can guarantee the safety of incoming Jewish students, and she gives a 5-minute disquisition on how she abhors racism, which, okay. The part that we're most familiar with is when Elise Stefanik asks, do the calls for genocide against Jewish people violate Harvard's anti-bullying policies? And we worked with Stefanik and other members of the House Education Committee to draft some of those questions. I'll tell you this behind the scenes, that was not meant to be a trick question. She was not expecting them to give the answer that she did. She was actually expecting them to say, yes, of course they do, because the trick question, the gotcha moment, was meant to be the follow-up. The follow-up, which is, now that you've all said, yes, it violates our code of conduct, how come you've allowed it on your campus? That was meant to be the aha moment. So if you rewatch the tape, Elise Stefanik is so taken aback by their answer, she actually says, and I quote, "This is a softball question, I'll give you a second chance to respond." And they says, no, it really does depend on the context. And I remember watching it, banging on the desk saying, aha, you see, I told you, because for months and months and months, we had been trying to tell the American people that what we Jews were experiencing was not anti-Zionism, was not protected free speech, we were not exaggerating. This was a double standard, that Jews are treated qualitatively different than every other minority group on campus. And we had our ideological adversaries like Claudine Gay making the case for us. So at no point did I ever feel intimidated, at no point did I ever feel that I couldn't do this, and it's not because I'm so great, it's simply because there is a poison in institutions of higher learning, and it must be called out. And you can go on my Twitter where I talk about this at length, and I really complain, but Harvard's leadership, Harvard's lawyers, Harvard students are some of the least impressive individuals I have ever met in my life. There's actually a great line, I believe it's from Thomas Sowell, but I could be wrong, where one of the great things about going to Harvard is you will never be impressed by a Harvard student ever again, and that is very much true. So at no point did I ever think I can't do this. And again, it's not because I'm so arrogant and cocky, it's simply because Harvard has so obviously and blatantly betrayed the trust of the American people and the American taxpayer.
So just digging a little deeper into your time at Harvard, has your experience there impacted your Jewish identity beyond just talking about anti-Semitism? And has it changed how you look at Jewish history or living a Jewish life today?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question. So first of all, not that the other questions weren't good, but all very good questions. Sorry. Well, first of all, let me say this. If you want to win friends, don't sue them while you're still a student. It did not endear me very much to the Harvard community. I actually remember I was in a class my second semester, and across from me was a classmate who I actually mentioned in our lawsuit as being particularly anti-Semitic. That was a little awkward. She wrote a blog about me saying, Shabbos Kestenbaum sucks. That is the title of the blog. That's why I tell people don't Google my name, because that's one of the first things that come up, I think. In terms of my Jewish identity, as I said, I've never been prouder. I've never been more confident in my Jewish values as well. But there is a point I want to pick up on, and I don't often say it at synagogues, but I think at a Chabad house where I really do feel a sense of connection and belonging, I will say this. I'm not someone who combats anti-Semitism or fights hate. It's really not what I do, and if that is what I'm doing a pretty bad job at it. There's a line in the Hebrew Bible of Esav Sones Yaakov that there's this ontological battle, almost this metaphysical, supernatural battle between the Jewish people and the descendants of Esav, which often is mistranslated as the Nation of Islam, Muslims, which is not true, it's just whoever the enemies of the Jews happen to be. And anti-Semitism will always exist, and my job and our job is not to combat it. In the same way, it's not up to blacks to combat racism, because racism is not a black problem, racism is a white problem. Anti-Semitism is not a Jew problem, because newsflash, we're not anti-Semites. It's an everybody else problem. And I'm not concerned with my classmates who are drawing swastikas. I'm not concerned if people think we have horns. I'm not concerned if people think that we control the banks. That's not what I'm about. I'm fighting for something. I'm fighting for Jewish values. I'm fighting for the Jewish homeland, and I'm fighting for, the Torah, the 3,000-year-old Torah that has been there before Harvard and will continue to be there long after Harvard. And that is what I said in my second answer. That is what our mission should be post-October 7th. It's not to just combat anti-Semitism and give the ADL more money. It's to redouble our efforts to impart Jewish wisdom and Jewish values onto our kids and grandkids. And I'll say this one last part, which connects to your question. Not that the first part did it, but you know what I mean. Remember the encampments? I was talking about I was following on my way to class. I'll tell you a dirty secret that we don't like talking about so often. A significant amount of the people who followed me on my way to class, who called for an intifada, who drafted that statement on October 7th, a significant amount of them were Jewish. Zev's Jewish, Hannah's Jewish, Sarah's Jewish, Scott's Jewish, Avi's Jewish, and these are Jews who cannot identify a mitzvah outside of Tikkun Olam, which, newsflash, out of 613 mitzvot, that's not even one of them. These are Jews who've never been to Israel, they cannot point to Israel on a map, they can't speak Hebrew, they have no affiliation with a Jewish synagogue or a Jewish day school, and we as a Jewish community have utterly failed them. And if you want to prevent that from happening again, I am telling you, as I said earlier, the only way we get out of this, the only way, is by investing as much of your resources, as many of your resources as possible into Jewish education, making sure that your kids and your grandkids at least know where the Chabad is. They at least know that there are alternative Jewish schools for them should they pursue it. Because I'm telling you, not as speculation, but as fact, if you don't invest in those efforts, I am telling you, your kids will end up following other Jews on their way to class calling for an intifada.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so looking at everything you've been through, what's been the toughest part of this whole journey? Did you ever feel like giving up? And if so, what kept you going?
Money. You guys weren't supposed to hear that. I was just between us. No, it has been hard because I get criticized nonstop. And October 6th, my life wasn't great, but I wasn't in the public eye. And being in the public eye, it's really difficult because people really don't like you, especially after I endorsed President Trump. I got disinvited from all these places. I lost. My college roommate texted me saying, "I don't want to speak to you again, lose my number." Yeah, that's really hard. That's been really, I lost all of my non-Jewish friends and most of my Jewish friends. That's been incredibly difficult. I speak every day. Every day I'm traveling. After this, unfortunately, I'll be in San Francisco tomorrow. Never again after that. Rabbi was smart, actually. He didn't tell me it was San Francisco, though. He just said, come to my shul. It's in, California. But after that, then I'm going to Palm Beach. Then I'm going to Amsterdam. So I travel a lot. And every time I speak, there's always pushback, which is fine. And I'm sure there's pushback in this room and you don't agree with me, and that's fine. I want us to have those disagreements and to disagree better and to do it in a respectful manner. But as a Jewish community and as an American people, we have so lost the ability to disagree with recognizing the humanity in each of us. And that to me has been incredibly difficult. I did not want to endorse President Trump. I know he's controversial. I know he's toxic. I did not endorse him at the convention speech. And I pissed off the entire Trump campaign by not doing that. But for whatever reason, I can talk about it later if you want, I did decide to endorse him. And immediately, people just stopped talking to me. And those are friendships and relationships that I valued, and I probably will not be able to get them back. It's been, wow, this is really therapeutic for me. My God. Jeez, I was not expecting this. After October 7th, it was either I pay for a therapist or get paid to vent. And I picked option 2. It's a lot more profitable, but this is nice. So yeah, it's been incredibly difficult, it's been incredibly lonely, but at the same time, I'm so proud to wake up every day and be part of this fight. I'm so proud to call myself a Jewish person. I'm so proud that these are the values that my parents imparted onto me. And even though I get pushback and I get criticized and I get death threats and I don't like it, at the same time, if these types of people don't like me, I'm clearly doing the right thing. You guys are good at this, my God.
just kind of relating to that point you brought up, many teens, including people here, deal with stuff like bullying or feeling left out and things like that. How do you think your fight against anti-Semitism at Harvard connects to how local students can identify anti-Semitism, what they can do about it?
Well, the great thing about the American judicial system is you could sue someone at any age, so that's always something to keep in mind. That was very funny. You guys should have laughed, but tough crowd. Maybe because I mentioned Trump, so that turned people off. But we can still laugh. I would actually say my experience is incredibly similar to what high schoolers and teenagers are going through. I'll say this: the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, they've had 12 hearings on anti-Semitism, and everyone knows the context-dependent one. The most important hearing that they had was actually the least attended. I know, I was there was no one there. And that was the hearing on anti-Semitism on the K through 12 school system. That is way more problematic, because a significantly fewer share of Americans are going to college, and of that share, and even fewer, obviously, are going to Ivy League schools. We're talking about quantitatively a very, very small number of Americans. But every American goes through the K through 12 school system. And when you have third graders in Sioux Falls, Iowa, reading August for Intifada, that is a profound problem. And we can talk about the Ivy Leagues, we can talk about colleges as we are and as we should, but ultimately it's the high schoolers, it's the middle schoolers, and unfortunately it's even the third graders who are battling this from a very, very early age. And I actually believe once you get to college, unfortunately for the most part, the narrative and the argument has already been lost. People are coming into the university spaces with their opinions and with their narratives already shaped. If we can get to people in a holistic, positive way as young as possible, again, not in an indoctrinating way, but in a positive, having warm senses of feelings and appreciation to their Jewish identity and to their Jewish values, even better. So the most important people I speak to are young people. I mean, no offense, whatever, but it's young people. And I always make this point, especially to the Jewish nonprofits, which is why they don't really invite me back anymore, is stop saying young people are tomorrow's leaders, because they're not tomorrow's leaders. They are today's leaders. They are doing the work that you guys should have been doing, I don't mean you, that they should have been doing, and they are doing the work every single day in their schools, because that's where opinions are formed, that's where relationships are built. So if you're a high schooler, if you're a middle schooler and you're battling this anti-Semitism, number one, you should know you have an army of supporters backing you, including me. Reach out to me at literally any point, and I want to support you. And number two, just know that you are part of the greatest story ever told. That's the story of the Jewish people. It's a tragic story, it's a sad story, but it's also a miraculous story, and it's a beautiful story. And you have 3,000 years of Jewish tradition hanging on your shoulders. And I'll say this last point, I did not go to Harvard to sue them. I actually studied the Holocaust. That's why I went. That's why I'm depressed all the time. And there's a great story of the Bludge of a Rebbe, Yisrael Spira, and he was in, I don't remember if it was Auschwitz or a different camp, but the story goes that the Nazis had dug about a 9-foot cavity, and they told the Jewish prisoners, we have to make a selection. We have to basically thin out how many people are here. If you can jump over the 9-foot cavity to the other side of the field, we will let you live. And of course, all the Jews knew that this was a death sentence. There's no way they can jump 9 feet in the air. And they go to the Bludge of a Rebbe and they say, how do we do this? What can we do? And he said, it's simple. When you jump, just close your eyes. He said, what? He said, just close your eyes. And sure enough, they all jump, they all close their eyes, and sure enough, when they open their eyes, they're on the other side of the cavity. And they go to the Bludge of a Rebbe and say, how did that happen? How did you know that would work? And he says, because when each of you closed your eyes, you were realizing that you're not just jumping in a vacuum, but you're jumping hanging on to the coattails of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. You're hanging on to the rope of 3,000 years of a Jewish story. That's what you're part of. That's what you're hanging on to. And a Jewish high schooler, whether it's here in California, whether it's in the middle of nowhere, Iowa, every single Jewish person is hanging on to that legacy, which is why the Lubavitcher Rebbe would always say, there's no such thing as just a small Jew. Right? I'm just a small Jew from San Francisco. I'm just a small Jew from Des Moines, Iowa. Every single Jew has profound importance and profound power. And I don't just mean that from a religious sense. I'm not saying this because I'm Orthodox and I'm trying to preach. I'm saying in a very literal, pragmatic way that all of your voices are so, so critical in this fight. Because as I told the teams earlier, we're outnumbered, we're outgunned, and we need your voices now more than ever.
So building upon that, let's say one of us sees something unfair at our school, like someone being picked on for who they are, maybe Jewish. What advice would you give us to speak up or make a change?
It's always the right time to do the right thing, which I think is a line from If it isn't, I'm trademarking that. It is always the right time to do the right thing. as I said, I was a progressive. I marched with Black Lives Matter. I marched at the Supreme Court when Roe v. Wade was overturned. Any affinity group, I supported them. I can compare my progressive credentials to any of you any day of the week. And I did that not because it was transactional, not because I expected things in return, simply because I thought it was the right thing to do. And whether someone is Jewish, Christian, Muslim, black, white, rich, poor, it does not matter. It is always the right time to do the right thing. And if you see someone who is being discriminated against, if you see someone who's being bullied, if you see someone who's being hurt or left out because of their religious identity, because of their sexual orientation, because of their political ideologies, we know more than anyone else on planet Earth what it is like to be on the receiving end of that. So we have a particular obligation to stand up and fight back. And in fact, when we first sued, we had a statement to the press, and I said, to be very, very clear, this is not just a statement for the Jewish community, although it certainly is, that's who it's for, but it's also for anyone who's been on the receiving end of bigotry, hatred, and discrimination. So if you see injustice, always make sure that you're standing up, especially as a Jewish person, which, as I said, we have a particular religious mandate to be doing it.
So, talking about Harvard and a lot of these schools today, like even Columbia, which a lot of schools you go because you think it's safe, what advice do you have for students who want to go to colleges or high school and want to be safe there?
Well, first of all, to paraphrase a certain American president, any parent who thinks of sending their kids to Columbia University should have their head examined, but I digress. I'll put it this way. Love Trump or hate Trump, to me, the re-election of Donald Trump was a great thing because it was a repudiation of the American people. The American people repudiated the Ivy League values, the sense of moral bankruptcy and intellectual hypocrisy, where they repudiated the sense of elitism. And the reaction to Donald Trump's re-election at Harvard University alone was professors canceled classes, professors baked lemon squares for their students, the Harvard Divinity School and the DEI hired Sunshine the Puppet to consult students. There was story time with Marty, there were free massages, there was basket weaving, I'm not making any of this up. And leaving aside the anti-Semitism for a second, the amount of CEOs and hedge fund managers and billionaires, including one who I just spoke to on Friday, who've told me to my face, you know, Shabbos, we really don't want to hire graduates from Harvard and Columbia and Penn and Yale anymore. The old way of you need to go to Harvard and those Ivy League universities to get a good job, it might have worked for your parents' generation. I'm telling you, it's just not true anymore. Employers are incredibly reluctant to hire graduates from these institutions, especially over the last year and a half. And worry less about, yeah, you should clap for that. And you should worry significantly less about what name of a college you put on your resume and significantly more about the values you believe in and the type of person you are. And I remember speaking at the Christians United for Israel Summit in D.C. over the summer. And I took a red eye from LA to DC. I arrive in my hotel room. It's like midnight. I'm hot. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I open the hotel room and I notice there's a gift basket waiting for me. And the gift basket has a handwritten note from Pastor John Hagee, who's the head of Kufi. He has millions and millions of worshipers. And he says, Mr. Kestenbaum, we're so sorry about what Jewish students are going through. We stand with our hostages, not our hostages, Am Yisrael Chai. And the gift basket, I noticed, was not only exclusively kosher food, it was exclusively kosher for Passover food. It was like really bad potato sticks and like the macaroons. And it suddenly occurred to me, and I posted this on my social media, went a little viral because it really struck a nerve. I said, look, for months and months and months, Jewish students have been begging for the bare minimum. We have been saying that if you're a professor and you told your students not to go to class and you'll give them full credit if they call for an intifada, they should be disciplined. Students who physically assaulted Jewish students at the business school should be expelled. And we have to fight our universities to get to this point. We have to fight them every single step of the way. And I made this point that there are peoples, there are institutions, there are organizations, and yet there are religions that don't just, and there are universities that don't just accept and tolerate Jews, but want Jews and love Jews and want us there. And I cannot for the life of me understand why parents are so insistent that we must send our kids to institutions where at best they are not wanted, and at worst, all of the values you have been raising them with will be scorned, will be denigrated, will be humiliated. And I know what some of you might be thinking, which is we have to fight back. We have to go to Columbia now more than ever. If you truly believe that, then move to Dearborn, Michigan, because we got to fight there because there aren't a lot of Jews there. But I've yet to hear a single parent make that argument, because I'm not calling anyone out because I don't know any of you, but in general, it's not that you want your kid to fight back. It's because you want your kid to go to Harvard. And yes, Jews should not go to Harvard, but not my kid. He should go. And it is so destructive. We, not just as Jews, but the American people, are so much better than institutions of higher learning that need to hire a puppet to console students after an election loss. But it's an argument I have to make, and there's so much resistance and pushback to this argument. The American people are better than these silly institutions that have so betrayed the trust of the American people and the American taxpayer. And I'll close by saying this: if you really believe it's so important to send your kids to these hostile environments, where forget about the anti-Semitism, where they are taught to hate the United States, where they are taught as fact to hate the West, then go to Rockland Community College, because Rockland Community College had a much larger encampment. It lasted way longer than the one at Harvard, but again, I have yet to see a parent ever make a credible argument that my kid needs to go to Rockland Community College. Because it's not about your kid fighting back, it's about your kid getting into a top university. And I'm telling you, if you want to help current Jewish students, if you want to help the Jewish people, if you want to help the country that we know and love move on from these morally bankrupt, intellectually hypocritical institutions, because the private sector is doing it, why aren't we?
Okay, we're almost at the end, but we've got two big ones left.
Oh no.
So, what's one thing you wish you could tell your younger self, or even us teens right now?
Don't go to Harvard. Next. No, okay, go on.
About being brave and proud of who you are, especially when it's hard.
Oh, wow. You guys really ask, like, existential. This is good. You should be my therapist. What was one thing I would tell them about being brave? Well, I don't think I am brave. I think I complain a lot. I'll say this. Sorry, it should take me a while to formulate an answer. I told you, when I went to Harvard to study the Holocaust, I would not go there to sue them. And Yad Vashem is Israel Holocaust Memorial Museum. It's actually a little controversial within what we call the ultra-Orthodox community, Haredi communities in Israel. Why? Because if you go to Yad Vashem, and I assume many of you have been there, they have a whole exhibit on resistance. However, their definition of resistance is what? Does anyone remember? If you've gone to Yad Vashem, when they talk about resistance, it's what?
Warsaw Ghetto.
It's the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Resistance, in accordance to Yad Vashem, is picking up a gun and killing a Nazi. That is resistance. That is the pinnacle of a strong Jew, that they picked up a gun and they shot someone. And this is not to demean or belittle that. That was a very good thing, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. I don't want you to walk away saying that my hot take was I don't agree with the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. However, the reason that it's controversial is because resistance can actually manifest in a lot of different ways. And if you're a devoutly religious individual, like Yehusila Yehuda Halberstam, the Klausenberger Rebbe, who lost 11 of his kids in Auschwitz, but nevertheless continued to only eat kosher in Auschwitz, that's resistance. Mm-hmm. And people think that the only way I can resist is by filing a lawsuit. The only way I can resist is going to a protest and punching someone in the face, which people have done, where the only way I can resist is if I wave an Israeli flag. Resistance can look and manifest in a lot of different ways. So I'm not telling people how they should respond. All I'm saying is that you should respond. But whatever that looks like to you, then do it. If resistance for a 12th grader in a particularly challenging high school is to simply wear a Star of David necklace, then do it. If resistance means raising a Jewish family, then do it. If resistance means filing a lawsuit, then do it. There's not one way of fighting back. There's not one way of being brave. However, the distinction is you have to do something. And this is a problem that too many young Americans, Jews, are not doing. I'll give you one quick example. 2 days ago at Harvard University, there was an unsanctioned protest of 4 unrecognized clubs to protest Israel and to chant for an intifada. And during the protest on campus, a staff member was caught on video ripping down posters of Kfir and Ariel Bibas. And you can go on my Twitter, you can watch the whole video. And I was not on campus, and so a couple of Jewish students sent me the video. And they sent it to me, and they said, actually, don't post that, we're going to send you something else. So they sent me a second video. It was the exact same video, but with his face blurred out. I said, why is his face blurred out? And they said, well, because we don't want him to know that we were recording. We don't want to be involved in any way. So even a video where they are not the perpetrators, where they did nothing wrong, even then they don't want to be involved. And it's not a criticism. I get why, and I didn't try to argue back. But why is it that I'm the only named plaintiff against Harvard? It's not because I'm so amazing and so brave and so articulate. It's because we were not able to convince, of the hundreds of Jewish students at Harvard, we were not able to convince more than one to file with me. And that's not good. That's really, really not good. So we need people to empower themselves by recognizing that they have to do something. It doesn't have to be a lawsuit. It doesn't have to be a video, but it has to be a something. And I would encourage you, when you go back to your friends and family, to brainstorm and galvanize ways in which you can resist, ways that you can fight back, and ways that you can be brave.
So for our last question, where do you see yourself in the future after all of this?
Oh my God, did my mom ask you these questions? Jeez. Where do I see? I don't even know where I am tomorrow. No, I'm in San Francisco. I'm dreading this day. I don't know. I don't want to sound cliche and say I take it one day at a time, because that's not true. But truthfully, I don't know. I think whatever I do, whether it's elected office, whether it's public policy, whether it's diplomacy, I want to be in D.C., so being in that realm. Whatever it is, it's going to be in service of the community I was raised in and the community that I know and love. And that's the American Jewish community. I've been so blessed and privileged and fortunate to be given a platform. It's a small platform, but it's a platform nonetheless, and I want to capitalize on it to make change and to fight for this community. And I was a surrogate for the Trump campaign, and there are some possibilities I could go in the Trump administration, who knows? But whatever it is, whatever it looks like, it's going to be some variation of calling out bigotry and discrimination and anti-Semitism wherever and whenever I see it. And I know that was the last question, although I'm happy to answer more, but always feel free to stay in touch, especially the high schoolers. If I can ever be of help to you, just reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram, just DM me, and I will always, always, always make myself available if I can be of help.
Thank you so much for sharing.